So the purpose of this video is to walk you through a basic S19 miner setup for home mining on 120 volts. You have to determine for yourself what you're going to use the miner for, if you want it to be really quiet and use it as a space heater, or if you want to just throw it in the basement and have it screaming away. Will kind of determine how you purchase items for this project. You can use an entire S19 and just run all 3 hash boards in it. You can use housing that you can purchase and run a single hash board in it, or you can do an immersion setup, which is what we're gonna do. To get power for this, there's 2 options. You can, just as of the last month, you can take an S19 power supply and you can do a modification to it that will allow it to run on 120 volts. It's yet to be determined how long-term safe that is and how much power you can draw from it, but that's definitely an option. But the most commonly used option that all the companies are offering these days is an S9 power supply. So the first step that we're gonna do is we're gonna modify our S9 power supply so that we can connect it wiring-wise to the S19 single hash board inside or to the main input. So here's our S9 power supply that we're going to modify to use for our miner. This one still has the stock fan in it. They're decently noisy, so some people replace the fan with a Noctua fan. There's a drop-in replacement that you can find in the parts list. We also have all the tools that I'm going to need for this. So we have 2 power cables to plug in. I have the screws that I'll need to connect it to the miner, and screwdrivers and cutters. So we're going to start by taking apart the housing. We have 3 screws on each side. We got our 3 screws. The housing just opens up on the top. And now we need our 3mm hex to take out power supply cables. Now we're going to modify these power supply cables so that we have 1 single Molex connector to plug into the control board. So we'll take one of these individuals off. And we're gonna just cut off the extra. And now we don't need these anymore, so we're gonna put them aside. I'm gonna put a little piece of electrical tape on the end of both of those, just so that we don't risk contacting anything with them. So now we have our single Molex to power the control board. We can put that back. Almost did that wrong. So our positive is on the bottom lug, negative is on the top lug. So black is negative. We're all set on that. Now we're going to connect our big lugs. Same thing. Now we'll reverse that procedure to put this back together. So make sure to put in your protective plastic. And this would be a good time to swap out your fan if you're going to put a quiet fan on this. Slide that back in. We're all done. We've got our modified power supply now. And now we will work on the S19. So we need to install the Loki chip. So we'll take off the top housing. You can see there's 2 screws on the front. You take those out. Go. Pops out. And here's our stock S19 power supply connectors. So this is the ribbon cable that tells the power supply what to do. And here's our power cable for the control board. So we're going to unplug both of those. We do not need those, so we'll set them aside. This is where the Loki chip comes in from Zach Bonsta. And we will install the Loki chip. Since we have a vanilla S19 and we're using Lux OS, we will not be putting in the hashboard spoofer. We're just going to put in the power supply spoofer. So I think that's what he calls it. So this thing installs right here where that power supply data cable goes. You just plug that in. And then we're going to take our orange and yellow. Yellow is going on the top left. Orange is going on the pin right next to it. All right, so yellow on the left, orange on the right. And then we come down here and orange is on the inside. And yellow right next to it. Now we have power for our Loki chip. And we are going to get rid of this Bitmain junk SD card and grab our SD card that has Lux or Brains on it. I'm going to use Lux. So we plug that in. And now we're set here. We're ready to connect power to it. So one thing to note, if you want to use Brains, you have to use one of these hashboard chips for each hashboard. If you want to use Lux OS, which is what we've been using on ours and are very happy with it, then you can just leave the control board connectors as it is to all the hashboards. And you know, it only matters if you're using 3 hashboards. If you're using 1, then you could plug this in, use Brains, and you'd be perfectly fine. Also of note, the hashboard ribbons, the data cables, these are generic between S9s and S19s. So for example, we had one that was all falling apart. It had seen better days, and we swapped it out from an S9 one that was nice and pliable and no problems. Got our hashboard working because we had a dead hashboard that was just a dead ribbon cable. So we're all set. We're ready to connect our power supply. Here we have our hashboard power. We're just going to plug that in right here where the hashboard power was, and we're good. And then we're going to connect our power lines to the miner here. Note these are pretty stiff because they're 2 gauge. You probably don't need 2 gauge. You could probably get away with 4 gauge. We have a very small positive, and so this is going to be our negative, positive and negative. So of note on the hashboards, the bolt on the furthest side, on the top side, is the positive, and to the next to it is the negative. So you don't want to get those reversed because you might fry something. We're gonna go to my bolt kit here, and we are gonna use an M4 or an M4 by 12. We're gonna use 2 of those, And we're gonna grab 2 screws, 2 nuts, 2 bolts, and 2 washers. There we go. Put that washer in. I'm just getting both of these placed before I tighten them, so it's not fighting me. Grab the nut on the bottom, tighten from the top. That's good. And grab that other one. Nice and tight. So we've got all our power connected. We are ready to rock and roll. We need to plug in an Ethernet here. And first, I'm gonna unplug the hash boards. For our initial boot up. Just so we can see our control board, make sure we can see it, make sure that the operating system is fine, and then we make sure the fans are working, and then we'll plug in our hash board connectors and make sure that all of the hash boards work and show up in the operating system. So everything boots up. Now we'll go and check it on the web browser. So here we have it. Pulled up our UI. It's loading. It's not going to load much because we don't have our ribbon cables plugged in, but we know it's working. We can't do any profile stuff because we don't have any hash boards. So now I'm going to disconnect power. Make sure you disconnect power first, and then we're going to plug in the hash boards. So we'll get our hash boards plugged back in. Got all 3 hash boards plugged in, and we are ready to go. So we're going to turn back on the power. We generally go into our modem or router to find our IP, but there's also an app called Fing that will just scan your network for you and show all the IPs that are active. So you can do either one, but you just type your IP into the browser and then it'll hop up Lugs firmware. And there we are. So we can go here and preset profiles, and by default it'll probably be set to like 700 megahertz, which is not what you want. So you'll come in here and put it back to just to start off with, it's good to do the lowest possible one. So you'll do 12 volts at 100 megahertz, and it'll save that and start tuning. And it takes a good 5 minutes for all the hash boards to show up and to finish tuning here, and you should get pretty much everything green on all of these once it's done. And we're looking at about 13 or 14 terahashes at 440 watts at the wall, so not too bad. Okay, now we've powered it on, everything is working. We've got 3 good hash boards. One thing to note on the settings, we generally run ours between 100 megahertz and 300 megahertz. That's about 440 watts of heat and power consumption measured at the wall, up to about 1200 watts at the wall. You don't really want to push your wall outlet more than 12 or 1300 watts. And you also really don't want to push the S9 power supply, or the hash board. If you're using a single hash board, you don't want to push that more than like 1,000 watts. So that will depend on, you know, the frequency. If you're running a single hash board, you'll be running it at a higher frequency, maybe 400 or 500 megahertz. But the power consumption shown in Lux OS or Brains OS is very inaccurate. So do not go by that. Go by a table where someone's already checked the power consumption of the frequencies of the miner. So keep in mind, you know, each hash board takes equivalent amount. So if you're running 3 hash boards at 100 megahertz, that's 440 watts.